Welcome. Today we have Richard Hamm with us. He is the president of Advantage Consulting and Training. Richard has more than 25 years experience training bankers in all phases of commercial lending and credit. He is also the course leader for commercial real estate appraisals and cash flow analysis for the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Richard, welcome and thank you for joining today's Banker Digest.
Thank you very much, Larry. Glad to be here.
Great. All right, well, let's get started, Richard. As you know, there's a growing discussion in the banking community on sustainable lending. Can you level set for us by defining sustainable lending?
Sure. I think first we have to just understand it's a very, very broad topic and it is difficult to define. And it goes part or hand in hand with ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues as well. In fact, in some ways, they're almost interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
I think a second thing to keep in mind definitionally is that together with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, it is a huge focus of almost all of our federal and state regulatory agencies that deal with banks. I think a third thing to help understand what it is, I think you have to ask yourself three questions. The first one is, do you care about attracting talent that wants to work at a bank that's making a difference in the world? Not just a bank as a bank, but a bank that's making a difference. Number two, do you care about responding to regulators who want to see efforts in, and I'm in the lending area mostly, in your lending function to better support the transactions and companies that improve things like resource constraints, population growth, in an aging population? And then there's a third question in and around, do you care about pleasing your ownership, your shareholders, who are beginning to, if not already, asking about and pushing for sustainability efforts by your bank? So as a sort of a fourth of these points past those three questions, I think it helps to understand how your bank can contribute to sustainability efforts, and it probably already is, even though we all know the banking system itself can't cure the problem. Consider a quote about, this is from a book about the Brown Brothers Harriman investment firm, started in Baltimore, ended up on Wall Street. The quote is from the author of the book: "We can learn much from Brown Brothers' commitment to what they call sustainable capitalism, to the belief that no individual firm can ultimately thrive unless the wider society thrives as well." Well, let's turn that around to banking, recasting that quote to sustainable lending and say, no bank can ultimately thrive unless the broader community thrives as well. And I think you think about it that way, that sustainability makes sense because it helps everybody.
That's great. That's really great. Yeah, I see your point. It's an excellent point about everybody being together, and no single bank or individual is going to cure and address this thing. So thank you, Richard. So how can banks and bankers increase their knowledge and awareness of sustainable lending activities?
Well, I think it starts with what your bank's already doing internally. Maybe your bank is already imaging its documents. Maybe you implemented prior to or during the pandemic some form of electronic signatures. One bank I work with has placed solar panels on many of its buildings, and it did it several years ago. So all of these things help the environment, conserve natural resources, et cetera. These are sustainable practices. We just need to learn to recognize that it is sustainable. Then I think the next thing you do is you look at your customers and what many of them have been doing. My whole argument is I think banks have been doing this. I think your customers have been doing this for some time. There's two big macro areas. Each of them have 5 little sub areas. And I think I get a lot of help from looking at all the investment firms and mutual funds that have sustainable investment objectives. They make this real clear, but the social themes are things like knowledge and technology, firms that provide services. There's a close link between sustainability and innovation that we don't realize sometimes. So look for products and practices, including software, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, robotics. Many of your customers are probably involved in those things. Just about anything healthcare, social service, We're under pressure with the aging population and lack of affordability of some healthcare services.
Right.
Things that promote safety, property and finance, even. Banks are very involved in real estate. You mentioned the real estate course at GSB. Uh, there's sustainable practices in housing that's more resilient to storms and things.
Right. Right.
Banks can create financial solutions that fit every stage of the innovation journey of these innovating firms, or the life cycle of these firms. And banks can help people overcome their financial challenges. And then even just general quality of life
Right.
affects things. Then there's environmental things, obviously, clean energy, efficiency of energy, environmental services, more sustainable transportation. And maybe a big category that captures even farmers is water management, better water management. That's going to be a big issue in the future. So things are out there that your customers are doing. So I argue that how hard is it to add a brief section to a typical bank credit memo or commercial loan package that discusses possible ESG actions or plans of your bank or its borrowers or customers? And at the same time, how hard is it to recognize your bank's efforts and your customers' efforts, and, like you said, brag about them on the website? I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Great. All good insight. So, you mentioned bragging. So what are the benefits to banks for sharing and even bragging about their sustainability lending accomplishments?
I'm convinced many of your customers want to see what you're doing.
Right.
They may not have reached out and sent you an email or talked to you, but I think they're looking for it, especially this whole topic of innovation, improved services and sustainability efforts or attributes of the bank, and examples of what the bank is doing with, or what its customers are doing with the support the bank gives that company in terms of its finance. So I think customers want to see and hear. I think you position the bank, if nothing else, to be caring and acting on sustainability and just caring about the community. Again, that link, sustainable lending being, the thriving community is the bank can't thrive unless the community thrives. I think you create a huge positive differentiator for current and prospective customers. You differentiate the bank from the crowded field of, all the other banks that are out there. And then I think sort of a really final key is that you give employees another reason to be proud of their bank and the position in the community.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Really good insight. So, speaking of the employee side of this, issues today about attracting and retaining employees. So you're at the center of banking training. How has training changed over the years?
Well, obviously, there's been an explosion of virtual training options. Some of it because we had to, we weren't traveling and we weren't meeting in groups.
Right.
So, and I saw obviously live and, and on demand, and on demand is a huge aspect. But I think what people forget is the benefit of being able to do things hybrid or blended, where you've got both virtual and live going on at the same time. But we're learning better ways to make that happen. But at the end of the day, it allows increased flexibility of that delivery beyond the typical in-person and on the job that tends to dominate. Now, at the same time, I think while we've learned better ways to keep the Zoom people and virtual people engaged, in terms of having even now conference rooms where people are sitting there at their computer at their conference room, and they're another tile in your virtual space too. We're also learning we've got to put things into smaller pieces or smaller chunks, but that's not the only answer. For example, I've worked for a number of years with the Graduate School of Banking's online seminar series, and I've learned we need to organize things better. So one of the things we started to do, even pre-pandemic, was to take their broad series of credit offerings I work on, and let's build a chart to where it's not just a bunch of topics that you get emails about or go to the website and see individual. Let's organize it into a chart and say, if you've got a credit analyst or you have a lender, here's the topics you can take in a logical progression.
Right.
And at the same time, taking some that are used to be 3 or 4 part programs that I would do that ran together and were marketed together.
Right.
We're still marketing them as a 3 or 4 part series, but I've worked hard to make each of those programs somewhat standalone so that you can truly plug and play and customize this to exactly what the employee needs. And I think that's the problem with having the explosion of virtual, is there's so many offerings, so many places. It's hard to step back and organize that into what one person really needs.
Right.
On their unique skill set and all that's happening. And together we're doing that. GSB's worked hard with a number of our great faculty on all topics, whether it's human resources or credit and lending like I do, so many different areas. I just think it's helped GSB to somewhat stand out and continue to be considered one of the best content-rich providers of training, whether it's in person or virtual, in our industry. But I think that's the way we retain employees. Employees want to know how to do their job. They want to have access to training, and it's not a natural thing for most managers to also be good trainers. So lean on state banking associations, lean on the graduate schools of banking like GSB. There's others, and I think it'll pay off in helping you retain employees. Great.
Good. All good points about the training. I like your point about recognition that the virtual requires much more chunking and kind of organizing and sequencing opportunities in presenting that. And I like your point about GSB has organized that so that people really can see a pathway, a curriculum to getting the training and knowledge that they need. So Richard, thank you for sharing with us your insights on how banks can grow their sustainable lending position and help not only themselves but their community at large to tackle these issues. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. In closing, thank you for joining us today at today's Banker Digest. If you have additional questions for Richard, please see the links in his bio.